Hello, and welcome to Forget What You Learned, a place for families to stop and reflect on the modern state of education. We empower you to challenge your own thinking about today's traditional school system and ask the question, are my kids thriving? I'm Corey Greenberg, a parent in the trenches just like you, and I chat with innovators, experts, and other parents who are changing the conversation, inspiring families to reevaluate how we define academic success. This podcast is brought to you by Pacific Preparatory and Tutor Corps, sister organizations molding education through innovative one-on-one learning for students in today's digital world. In today's episode, I talk with Diana Clark, a seasoned expert in mental health and parenting, about a concept that I think needs more airtime, the 50-year-old notion of good enough parenting. Diana is a fan, and we go in depth about the idea of embracing our own imperfections and allowing our kids to experience discomfort and learn from their mistakes. It means taking our foot off the gas, which goes against the helicopter parenting norms of our generation. To sum up, Diana thinks parents should do a lot less, and kids should do a lot more. It all sounded really good in theory. After all, I don't know about you, but I'm tired. Don't miss our conversation to find out how to be a good enough parent. Hello, and welcome to the podcast. Today, we're talking about a juicy topic in the world of parenting. I'm here with Diana Clark, whose 20-plus year career spans law and mental health, and she's the current president of O'Connor Professional Group, an organization that offers crisis management to therapeutic recovery coaching and aftercare monitoring for families who need help. Diana is a renowned family recovery advocate in the field of addiction and mental health treatment, and she's been aiding families during times of turmoil for over 20 years. As a specialist in both family systems and parenting, Diana is a recognized force of clear speech, logic, and loving acceptance, and has helped thousands of family members establish healthy boundaries, manage expectations appropriately, and develop plans for their families. Today, I want to talk about a parenting dynamic that has actually been on my radar for a while. Coincidentally, Diana recently presented at a national conference on promoting resilience versus comfort in our parenting efforts, and highlighted a term coined back in the 50s by Donald Woods Winnicott called good enough parenting as an approach we could all use a refresher on. Because Diana's position is that today's generation of parents have increased their expectations of themselves and reduced those of their children, which causes a cascade of long-term effects. Most importantly, the inability to handle adversity. We're going to unpack how the self-esteem movement that took root in the 70s may have spurred the idea that a parent's job is to make their kids feel good, regardless of the circumstance. If we protect our kids from hard situations, they'll have higher self-esteem. The problem is that self-esteem isn't something you give someone. It's earned internally by taking risks and coping with the inevitable failures in life. Okay, I could just go on and on here, so let's just dive in. First of all, Diana, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Corey. I really appreciate it. I always feel awkward when somebody reads my bio because I think, but what about this? And not that anymore. Because this is a field, when we talk about parenting, it seems to change about every 10 years. What was important 10 years ago is now being seen as progressively causing problems now. So I like to think of this as a work in progress, always.
I could not agree with you more on that. And I think it's very indicative of, I'm a parent in the trenches at the moment. I have kids who are 14, 12, and 10. And I agree with you that what seems to be the right thing to do, and we're all trying so hard to do the right thing, keeps changing. And it's impossible to keep up. And there's just a lot of information out there that's overwhelming and things that seem to be in disparity. Like we keep hearing about the adolescent mental health crisis. And as a parent, you would think that means, oh my goodness, I need to protect my child. I need to make sure they are, as supported. We're very in tune with their emotions, and we send them to therapy when they need therapy. But I think that it becomes a situation where we're going too far in the other direction. And so that's what I want to unpack with you today. So let me just start with this. What spurred you to talk about good enough parenting? Why do you think we need to hear about that?
So I think I read a quote today in preparation for this that made me really remember why I am not a perfectionistic mother or human. Perfectionism, it only perfects the art of being dissatisfied. And I think that if we are trying to be perfect parents, we are really promoting we're going to be dissatisfied in ourselves, and we're going to be dissatisfied in our children, because they aren't ever going to measure up to perfect. But when I'm talking about good enough, I'm really talking about something different than just not being a perfectionist. Okay, so let's go back to how the term was coined. Donald Winnicott was really responding to Freud's assertions that everything that mothers were doing was causing problems with their kids. Okay, everything was the mother's fault. They stubbed their toe, it was the mother's fault. They had schizophrenia, it was the mother's fault. But everything was the mother's fault. And he reacted to this as a pediatrician and as somebody who was around mothers, and basically said, no, mothers only need to be good enough. And good enough actually creates, in some ways, the vacuum for our kids to live more realistically, knowing that life does have disappointments, knowing that all people are not omnipresent, that even mothers who let their kids cry in the crib for that extra 10 minutes may be teaching something that that child needs. That was certainly the theory. And when I had my son late in life 23 years ago, I really had to embrace that because of my own nature to want to do it correctly. I remembered Winnicott's words, all I needed to do was be good enough. And that was really helpful. Otherwise, we're buffeted all the time by this sense that we're not doing enough work.
Well, I don't know how we get this message across to so many parents, like what is it? Because I'm not immune from this either. I think that, being in the trenches as a parent, there's so much societal pressure, like you said, to do it right. Where does that come from though? Is it because of the way we were parented? Like, I read that book Generations. I don't know if you've read
Yeah,
that book, but
yeah.
yeah, so it talks about, children who like late Gen X and early millennials, we sort of weren't as parented. We were kicked out the door and said to come home at, 5 o'clock. And I mean, my childhood was full of that. But then now, with my generation parenting, that's not what's happening. We are definitely helicoptering, we're overparenting. Like there just does seem to be this internal drive to manage all of that. So I
So
don't
let
know.
me do a little history lesson. 50, 60 years ago, as much as you described, it was up to us as kids to prove our worth to our
Hmm.
parents. That was the dinner table conversation. Never was, are you happy? The dinner table conversation was, did you do your homework? What kind of grade did you get on the test? Or it was, go out, did you do the dishes? Did you take out the garbage? There was much more of an emphasis on us serving the family than now. Flip that 180-degree now, and the very same people who were trying to prove their worth to their parents are now trying to prove their worth to their kids. Am I a good mother? Am I measuring up to this standard? I'm not saying my mother didn't care or my father didn't care whether they were being a good parent or not, but there was never the same kind of evaluation. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that parenting existed within communities where you were watching people parent all the time. You were parenting the neighbor's kids, other people were parenting your kids. There was much more cross fertilization and pollination in communities about parenting. Mothers got to see other mothers parent. We got to see the problems with um, the way certain strategies worked. So now it is only in reading and looking online where there's much less community around mothering than there ever used to be. And I think that was one of the biggest teachers.
Yeah, so well, the community has changed maybe. Like the point of it is not to support one another, it's to compare
Maybe.
ourselves to one another.
Maybe. Well, that's what social media seems to do.
Right.
It does.
And the information overload
And
piece,
information
I mean,
overload.
yes, there's so many books, blogs, Instagram, TikTok, all of that where mothers and fathers too are getting their information about how to be a parent, and it all like I said, it just seems to conflict. So, where do you place sort of the adolescent mental health crisis as I touched on? Where is the anxiety and the depression? How does that fit into what we're describing about parenting
God, I
now?
think this is so complicated. I think that pre-COVID, we were already struggling as adolescents due to isolation, maybe due to the lack of community effort or kids hanging out after school. I know my son, I live in rural Vermont, so it's by nature an isolating place, but a lot of his social life took place on a screen. And I think
Mm.
that we suffer for that. As a lot of things are available, but I think we also suffer from the lack of being in somebody's orbit, so to speak. And I think that parents are scared. I think we're all scared. The cascade of feeling out of control in our culture is also passing down to our kids. That there's so much going on between climate change and the political spectrum, and then we had COVID come in, and then we have more isolation due to many schools being canceled and lack of community, and people not being able to develop community in a time when it was really essential. So I think when we get scared as parents, what do? More. We do
Yeah, we just
more.
overcompensate. Yeah. Yeah. I was listening to Lisa Damour, I think that's how you say her name, on a podcast recently, and she was talking about COVID, as you mentioned. And, the two things she said teenagers need are autonomy and peers, and that those two things were taken away during COVID.
Yep.
And so and she agreed with what you just said. It was already on that train, and it just kind of compounded the problems.
And I do think parents, in their quest to do it right, have done too much. When parents ask me, "What do I need to do? What do I need to do?" My one word answer is less.
Can you give us an example of that? Like let's play it out in a scenario. What kind of, you know, in what way should they do less?
All right, I can start with a story that happened when my son was in the third grade. I got called in by the third grade teacher, and with a full finger wag, she swung her finger at me and said, "You are doing too much. He's a mess.
Hmm.
He expects things to be given to him. His backpack is a mess. The minute he opens it up, his desk is in disarray. You're doing too much. He's not thinking for himself."
Hmm.
And I lowered my head shamefully and said, "I know, I teach this, and you're absolutely right." So that day I left with full resolve to change. I didn't change much, but I changed one thing. I no longer packed his backpack, and I no longer made sure he had everything for the day. Those were the two changes I made. I didn't change a whole lot else. I was, a fairly current mother who was very concerned about her son's well-being all the time. So the next day comes, grabs his backpack, he gets in the car, we get up to the school, and he says from the back of the car, "I forgot my sneakers. You need to go get them." And I said, "Really?" First of all, the teacher had just pointed out to me that he was an entitled little kid, and here I was hearing it for the right in my ear and thinking, that is what I'm promoting. So I said, "Well, no, actually, I didn't forget your sneakers. You forgot your sneakers. They were right next to your backpack." I couldn't resist that. And I said, "You can make it through the day. You'll make it through the day without them." That was my first lesson. And did he say, "Okay"? He said, "What?" He said, "I am uncoordinated. I have gym. I'm going to be bullied, and it's going to be your fault."
Oh my goodness.
He was
Dagger to
good.
the heart.
Such daggers. And I said, "Go ahead. You'll make it through the day." Anyway, he makes it through the day, of course. But who do you think had a worse day?
You.
Of course, I waited for the bad mommy
Yep.
police to call all day long. You allowed your son to be uncomfortable, which is now a crime in our country. We are trying in our best intended ways to rule out discomfort, thinking that our kids are going to be well. What we're doing instead is creating fertile ground for kids not to have to grow.
Oh my gosh, I feel this so much. I really relate to your story as coincidentally, my eighth grader left a project that he did for science on the kitchen table. I walked by it just a few minutes ago and saw it, and you really, I mean, immediately I go into this conversation with myself of, well, I could actually run that up to the school. But like you, I have learned the same exact lesson, Diana, with my own kids, and of course your oldest is always your guinea pig, and seventh grade boys have it tough. And I had one of those last year, and executive functioning is not easy for any kid. And then I do think, and maybe we can talk about this too, there are a lot of demands on kids now that maybe were not as present when, I was a kid. They have to turn in all of their assignments in 12 different ways, and they're overscheduled and all the things. There's a lot of demands on them, and I think that's part of, like, maybe there's guilt there that, oh well, like, he worked really hard on that and I probably should just help him this one time because blah 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 blah. But like you said, I've learned that lesson and he will survive. And actually, when I don't bring it up to the school, he comes home and he says, because we've had that same interaction, I can't believe I forgot my thing. It's not, hey, mom, why didn't you bring me? He doesn't even expect it of me anymore. And you're right. It just has turned into, all of a sudden, he feels accountability and responsibility, which is what we need for them to do when they become adults, right?
Exactly. A wise woman said to me when my son was born, "As moms, you have two jobs." I was like, "Okay, I can do two jobs." And she said, "One is to love him just because he breathes, just for who he is. And the other one is to make sure he can function without you." And I thought, over the years, I've thought about that quote. I've been very, very good at loving him for just who he is. I've not been so effective or as successful on the second job, which is really trying to make sure he can function without me. And that is where my advice comes to parents: do less so they do more. Because that's the physics of parenting. The more we do, thinking we're modeling it or putting them over the next corner, the next hurdle, the less they do. And the less becomes the new normal. And then we're sitting there kind of going, why do they do so little?
Hmm. Yep. Well, and I wonder if you're seeing this in your work with O'Connor PG, that we're having a crisis with failure to launch of our college aged, whether they go to college or not, just post 18-year-old high school. Can you talk about that a little bit? What's happening with this population?
So, what we're knowing is that it used to be that you'd go to high school, you'd go off to college, and college was the launching pad. College is no longer a launching pad necessarily. Kids go to college if we're lucky, or they're lucky, or they have some direction to go to college. But that isn't the end of the launching journey. That's actually the beginning. What we're noting is that the same milestones that got achieved in the 70s by 21 or 22 are now achieved in the early 30s. So there's this elongated what they're calling emerging adulthood. And whether we want to call it something or not doesn't matter. It is happening. We're living longer. That period of young adulthood is lasting longer too. And so they're in a quandary. They don't do it the way their parents did it. Their parents sort of want them to do it that way, but they're not equipped to, because we had been given opportunities to learn lessons all along.
Yes, exactly. Again, exactly. So how do we start to kind of course correct? What are the things? Because I think in your talk, you gave some tips, like really action items for parents. So where do you think that we can just start?
Well, I think first examine the ways you are doing what your kids are capable of doing.
Mm,
And then look at
yeah.
what the message is that promotes. If you're responsible for everything, that means they're not responsible for anything. So
Hmm.
start saying, I'm going to do this differently. I'm going to embrace a new, we're more of a community. You're old enough to put the napkins on the table if they're 3, or you're old enough to cook dinner if they're 17. But there are lots of ways to create community in the home that we can do. So that would be one,
Okay.
but mostly just do less. Let things be more their call and watch what they do. Try not to leap in and rescue unless unless it is really a life-saving effort. Here are the 4 questions I use. One is, whose problem is it if they come to you with a problem? The answer is theirs. Second question is, who grows if I solve this problem? The answer is the
Mm.
person who solves the problem is the person who grows. When I fill out college applications like I did for my older son, I knew what a college application felt like again. He didn't. 3, what am I depriving them of when I fix? And the fourth is, what do they gain if I stay out of it? So I kind of use that rubric in my own head with not just kids, but with people.
Those are really good questions to ask. And if we go back to, scenarios, how does this translate to supporting our kids who are in emotional pain? And if, as a parent, we don't know, like, we're not trained psychologists or therapists, and we don't know the difference, because, again, there's all of this talk about anxiety and depression. And how do we parse out what's rising to the level of clinical from a parent? If your child's coming home every day and let's say they have like a bullying situation going on, that could be a good example of what you're just saying, but there's nuance to it there too. Is like, how do we know when we do need to step in?
2 weeks.
2 weeks, okay.
Unless they're a serious threat to life or limb, 2 weeks. Have they stopped showering? Is their behavior changing? Do they seem to be using substances? Are they not brushing their teeth? Are they having trouble getting up? Are they not tracking their homework? And is this uncharacteristic of what it was like a week or 2 ago? Then yeah, you call in the professionals. 2 weeks.
So that means that, shifting your focus away from the situation at hand, like I mentioned, maybe the bullying situation, and just basically being there to process your child's feelings, and then maybe making a mental note of, okay, my kid's really struggling today. Let's see what tomorrow brings, and tomorrow until, let's say, you do reach that 2 week mark. At that point, it's okay, maybe I need to step in here.
Maybe bullying isn't a good example. I think bullying is traumatic enough that if somebody is experiencing bullying, you should get a professional on board.
Okay.
I would want a professional on board if my son was being bullied. I really would. I think whether that's a coach person, but somebody who isn't as wanting to tear the other human from life and limb, because as a parent, that's the instinct.
Hmm.
And to have somebody help them build some Teflon that isn't a parent. I think it's important.
Actually, that's a good point too, is that, it's not necessarily rescuing your child if you're bringing in someone else to help mediate or help coach.
Help them
It's
do the hard work.
exactly. Yes.
Yes. It isn't at all rescuing. It is basically, you've got work to do. When we have work to do, we call in the pros.
Mhm. Yep, and reframing it in that way. I love that. Well, the other thing that you talked about in your presentation was entitlement. So I know we touched on that a little bit. Do you have more you want to say about about entitlement
I
today?
could do a whole presentation on it, but just that, entitlement isn't just for the wealthy. It isn't just for the
Mhm.
poor. It is the expectation that the world, my parents, my brothers, my sisters, the school owes me something without any corollary responsibility on my part. In life, the more we can emphasize with our kids, there are always consequences, whether they're good or they're bad, and there's always corollary obligation, a give and take in any system, any interaction, any system.
I love that. I love that. Okay, great. Well, this has been lovely. I think that one thing I would love to hear from you, because I know you're very well read, is what do you think? What's a book that you think all of our listeners, should pick up?
So there's a couple of books. There's one by William Strixrud, Strixhud. I believe that's how it's spelled, called The Self-Driven Child.
Oh,
And
yes.
it's a good one on these concepts. And then the other one I'm looking at right now, and shouldn't be reading, but should be just turning over, is called Your Turn: How to Be an Adult by Julie Lythcott-Haims. And it's really, really valuable information for those kids transitioning. We also offer transition services at O'Connor Professional Group for those people who really are finding themselves in a quandary without a direct path and could use coaching support. They don't have to be falling off the ledge in order to achieve and benefit from coaching.
I love that. And again, that's bringing in someone else that isn't the parent. That's often a lot less fraught with all of those dynamics and,
The other thing we do is we coach parents. So, because I don't know how parents do this without either a team of professionals or a coach who can help them sift all the myriad of information and messaging they're getting.
yep. Which brings us back to the whole reason I wanted to have this conversation. And I just so appreciate you coming on and sharing your perspective. To leave our listeners with, how can people find you? How can people find O'Connor PG if they need your support?
So I am D as in Diana Clark at o'connorpg.com. And that's the best way to reach me. And O'Connor PG can be viewed on o'connorprofessionalgroup.com. Thank you,
Great.
Corey. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Diana. It's been lovely having you. I've been wanting to have this conversation for a long time and I couldn't think of anyone better to have it with. So
Thank
thanks for
you.
coming on the podcast
I
today.
appreciate it.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Forget What You Learned, hosted by me, Corey Greenberg. As always, our goal is to allow you to zoom out on the snapshot of your family's life and answer the question, are my kids thriving? We're here to inspire you to make those small and maybe big changes to answer yes. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Pacific Preparatory and Tutor Corps, sister organizations committed to educating students with an innovative and holistic approach in today's digital world. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave a rating and review. See you next time.